Welcome to I Swear on My Mother's Grave, a show filled with bold, funny, vulnerable conversations about the loss of our complex mothers, or conversations about wills, estate planning, and lawyers. Yay! Who said talking about the loss of our moms couldn't be fun? So, have you ever wondered what probate court was? No? No one? And who your beneficiaries would be if you died? And have you ever wondered if white, heteronormative, male estate planning lawyers showed their emotions and cried? Well, if so, then we have the episode for you. So grab a coffee or a cocktail or a sparkling water, and let's talk about how to set our loved ones up for success by making a will and checking it twice. It is one of the kindest things you can do for the people who love you, because wading through grief without dealing with the legal system is complicated enough. So thinking ahead about what could happen to you and planning next steps is key. Our guest, Ryan Holmes, is with the law firm Clark Hill and is one of the kindest, most down-to-earth, calming, and professional people I've ever met. And I met him in the weeks following my own mother's death in 2016. I didn't realize until many years later that he had lost his own mother in 2006. In this episode, Ryan, an attorney, wants you all to think about your end-of-life wishes, your beneficiaries, how messy and complicated things can get when documents aren't signed and completed, and how it's much easier to talk to other people about their grief than it is to talk about his own. Because this conversation was the first time Ryan had talked about the loss of his own mother in over 17 years. Yeah, lawyers are people too. This is Ryan Holmes. When you're working on it yourself, and we're going to talk more about it, but like a lot of people put that stuff off because it's emotionally hard to think about or deal with the thought of dying in a plane crash and leaving your children. So people put it off, or they don't know how to start. So for you, I know that you do it for a living, but when you're working on it personally and it's separate from your job, it's your own will and, amendment. How do you process those feelings of thinking about not being here for your children?
Well, so it's when my wife and I sit down and talk about like, who do we want to have as the guardian? It's actually a very pragmatic conversation, right? Because we're trying to make sure that we're doing what's best for them. We're gone. There's nothing we can do about that. So it's almost, I'm able to strip out some of the emotion because I do this every day, right? I could sit here and we could talk for 10 hours and I could tell you horror stories and how they could have been avoided, right? So I just know that I have to do it. So when my wife and I sit down, it's very pragmatic. It's like, here's who we have. Is this still the best choice? And then we sit down and we talk and we go back and forth and we have an open dialogue. And, we realize that if circumstances change, we'll change it again, right? Mm-hmm. But we're just trying to make the best decision based upon whatever circumstances we're facing, at the time, right? Because we had a nanny for 10 years that, now that our kids are older, we really don't need. So, one of our first guardians was my wife's sister. And at the time they had one child, now they have 4, right? So all of these things that had changed in life kind of make you evaluate your own decisions on what happens with the guardians and such. So, we try to be really pragmatic.
And what does that mean? Like is pragmatic like they're the best people financially, or we trust them the most, or they have their own kids so they know how to take care. What does that mean when you say pragmatic for who you're choosing?
I think it's a little bit of everything because, my wife and I have life insurance. So if we are, hit on the way to work or whatever, our kids are never going to really want for anything. They're going to have a very, very comfortable life, right? Which is the whole point of life insurance. So it's managing like who can really take care of them. Where should they live? We live in Northwest Indiana, as you know. All of our family is in Illinois or further remote. One of the things that we did personally is we talked to, if anybody wants to know who my guardian is, I'll say, we actually chose my wife's younger sister because they have a smaller family. Basically we said, if we nominated you, it'd be very important for us to have our kids finish school where they're at. They've always wanted to move. So we said, if we nominated you as guardian, would you move into our house, which is much bigger than the house that you have, and take care of our kids? And, once the kids were done with the house, we would just give you the house.
She's like, sure, sign me up. Yeah, she's love your house. Yeah.
We had a conversation with them. And I mean, that's how we solved it. I mean, families do it different ways and every family's unique. So, when I'm talking to people with kids, it's usually around guardians. Like, who do you pick? It's like, that is so family specific. I can give you some high level guidance, but ultimately you're going to have to make the decision.
Right.
My advice is always to talk to the people, right? Because, if you nominate a guardian, you want to make sure they're going to act. So it's always best to have that dialogue and make sure that everybody knows what they're getting into.
They shouldn't be blindsided.
Correct. So it's a little bit of everything, right? The money, the people, the circumstances, and you just kind of make a decision.
And so I came to you through a referral through a financial planner that I had to hire after the loss of my mom in 2016, because I inherited through her and my dad. They were divorced, but my mom had a trust set up and an IRA, and luckily she had a will and she had a whole big binder of things, but she hadn't signed off on the beneficiaries, right? Like, they had gotten a divorce, my mom and my dad, and she had not dealt with that part of it. She had left it blank because she was sick or depressed or didn't want to address it. So it was left open. And so I'm the only child, so there really isn't any issue with who's going to take over or who. I knew that I would be receiving this after my mom died, but I had to go to probate court to legally be told, yes, you can have all of this, and here's how it's going to roll, and here's how it's going to work. And what a gift, what a privilege that was coming to me. But I also was like, this is a pain in the butt. I now have to go and spend money in court to legally be told, yes, no one is here to contest your estate, right? That's what probate is, right? People could come and can you explain what that is for the listeners so that you sound smart and I don't sound dumb?
I'll try. So the way that I try to explain it is there's really three types of property. One is joint tenancy property, and that's property you own with somebody else, and it passes when one person dies to the other joint tenant. And this really applies to any state. So it doesn't matter if you're in Illinois or Michigan. I mean, there's some quirks, but I think overall, for your listeners, there's really three types of property. So joint tenancy, and then there's contractual property, which passes pursuant to the terms of the contract. So like a life insurance policy, you name a beneficiary. That's a contract. Upon your death, the money goes to the beneficiary. Likewise, the 401k would be a contract. A trust is a contract, right? The trust says, upon my death, the property goes here and here. And then there's probate property. Probate property is property that's just in your name alone with no designation of where it goes.
Okay.
So like in your case, your mom had the IRA and it didn't have a beneficiary. So by law, that goes to her estate. And then we need the probate to get the probate property to where it goes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The common term is like a will, right? The will says this is where my property goes. And in absence of a will, there's an intestacy statute, which is basically all the legislatures have said, if you die without a will, we will tell you where your property goes. So it's generally, parents, siblings.
Right.
Is how the intestacy statutes work. So the probate process gets property in your name to where it's supposed to go. And it's a pain in the butt.
It was a pain in the butt. And you have to wait and you have to pay lawyers to I could have done it myself. People were like, you could save money and file papers yourself. You're like, oh, I'm an actor. I don't know how to do that. Or I'd have to show up in court, right? They have to go to the courthouse. And there was just a lot of paperwork that you didn't do. My mom's law firm did it. And then when that was cleared, I came to you and we made a will for me, right? In my name, because I didn't have one. And then recently you updated my will for me and my husband, or we made a will together. So yeah, it's an intense process. And especially I remember in those 2016 years, I didn't know the language. So I didn't know what to ask for, right? I didn't understand. And then I have to start thinking about my own mortality and think about who my beneficiaries would be, right? And it's tough. Yeah. And who gets what and how do you delegate it and what's the percentage? And yeah. And I just kept thinking about how it's such a privilege to receive inheritance, this complicated feeling of receiving and losing her at the same time, right?
Yeah.
and then being angry that she didn't sign the papers and didn't make me go to court because she didn't want to deal with it. So she left it. She left this document unsigned. But a lot of people leave lots of things unsigned, lots of things they don't solve or finish or create as they're living or when they're dying, right? I'm sure you see this with clients a lot.
A quick story, because like all of these situations, they manifest in real life and they're horrible. And I will tell you, like, when we first got together, right, you didn't have kids, and
right,
and that makes estate planning hard, right? Because if your parents, it's pretty easy. We're going to split everything between my kids, and we'll put some ages in, and assuming one of them doesn't go off the rails or something. And some do. I mean, I've had to draft provisions around the kid gets it if he's out of prison for 18 months and all kinds of stuff. But
whoa,
for like a single person like you or when we met without kids, estate planning is hard.
Or married. Yeah. Right. Which friend do I like the most? Will Jonathan's be a nice boyfriend? I just didn't know. Yeah.
Where does it go? Oftentimes we find stuff that people meant to do, but it was unsigned. So I had a client who had an uncle who had no kids, really no one. And he was actually abandoned by his father when he was young, raised by his mother, knew the mother's side and whatever. So he passed away. And on his desk, he had a will that said, I leave everything to someone, but it was unsigned. So we don't have a will that passes to the people that he knew. He wanted it to kind of go to mom's side, which is logical. He knew them throughout his life.
Right.
But he didn't sign the will.
Would that have to be notaried or no? He could just have signed it. Did it happen?
No, you need two witnesses under most state law. Two witnesses. So
Okay.
A signature and two witnesses. Most wills are notarized just as a safety measure, but it's not required. It's two witnesses in every state that I've ever looked at. But he died without a will. So it went intestacy, went up over on his father's side, found someone he had never met. And that person, under Illinois law, ended up inheriting about $2 million because he was not proactive. And he had it on his desk when he died, the will.
Oh my God. Wait, and he has children or he doesn't have children?
No children. He had no children, never married, never had any children, never adopted any children. Knew his mom's side of the family because the dad abandoned him. And then some remote relative on his dad's side comes out of the woodwork and takes half of his money. I mean, it's crazy, but it happened. And
who was it supposed to go to? Like when you look at the will, like who was it supposed to go to? And can that person contest it? I mean, I know it's not legal, but who was it supposed to go to?
It would have been to his, I think it would have been a cousin, if my recollection of the relationship was right.
Okay.
And it didn't. She got half, right? Because you go up and down and find the living people.
Right.
But it wasn't his intent. He didn't take that last step. I tell clients all the time, like, get something in place, because if it's 95% correct, it's better than 0% correct.
Mm-hmm.
So just get something in. You can always change it. It doesn't have to be perfect. These documents are meant to be changed. Just get something done.
So what do you think that is? Do you think we can't psychoanalyze everybody, but why do you think he waited? He just was putting it off. He was just putting it off and putting it off. Like he got busy with his life. Or what is the hesitation sometimes, do you think?
I think people get busy with life, and this is always low on your list, because on a day-to-day basis, you're going to come home, you're going to have dinner, you're going to go to bed, you're going to wake up in the morning, right?
Right.
The mortality factor generally doesn't kick in for people, unless they're terminally ill. No one thinks I'm going to wake up today and have a heart attack, which is what happened to him.
Mm.
So I think that's a part of it. I think another part of it is people, they generally put off what's uncomfortable, and to sit down and think about dying is not a comfortable thing to do.
No.
It's a part of my job. I've learned to deal with it. So maybe it's a little easier for me, but it's difficult, right? Because these are difficult decisions that you have to make.
Can you talk about like the words trust? The word trust seems so, it's like bougie, or, it means money, and then wills, right? Anybody can have a will. Trust is a different conversation. But I think a lot of people go, well, I don't need to make a will because I have no money, right? Or they say, what am I leaving people? Nothing. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because even I was like, I I'm confused when Jonathan, my husband, was like, wait, shouldn't I have one? Do I have a trust or do I just have a will? What am I making with you? I know you have a trust now because you're a mom, but you also have a will. What do I have? So can you just talk about those two things and also tell people that you can make a will at any point in your life and you don't have to have millions of dollars? And, so talk to me about all of that.
Everyone really needs a will, because especially if you have kids, right? Because if the will is where you nominate the people that would take care of your kids if something happened to you. So trust really started to get popular probably in the early 90s. And a trust is basically a will substitute. I like to kind of talk in simple terms because I think it's easier to understand.
Yes.
So when I talk to clients, I talk to them a lot about like buckets, and here's the different buckets, and here's the buckets of what they do. For most of the clients, and I'll use myself as an example, the estate plan has a will, which is like a safety net. And the will says, upon my death, anything in my name gets poured over into the trust. So we call it a pour over will. And then the trust is a bucket that upon your death, it holds the assets and distributes the assets as set forth in the trust. So in our trust, it says, split in equal shares for our kids. Well, it says take care of the spouse first. We'll talk about like if my wife and I were both gone, there's buckets for both of our boys. And then they have access to them, as we have drafted in there. And then eventually when they hit, I think it's 35, they would have full access to take the money out and spend it as they saw fit. So if you have a trust, you also need a will, right? Because the will is a safety net. So if you don't put that real estate in, it will get to where you want it to go. So there's a lot of coordination. And this isn't, I know that there's a lot of like self-help websites out there and, LegalZoom and other mechanisms where you can go. Really, I think dangerous for people to go out and try to do self-help with this kind of stuff. I've seen self-help situations where people tried to do it and they did it wrong. Last year, we had somebody that went the LegalZoom route and only had one witness. Well, the will gets tossed because there's not two.
Oh my God.
So, there's a few things in life I don't think you ever want to really skimp on. One is your doctor, right? You don't want to go to some quack doctor. Your lawyer, you don't want to go to a quack lawyer or do self-help. Like if you had an electrical problem, if I had an electrical problem, I'm not going to go touch the breakers. I don't want to get electrocuted.
Right. But some people might say they can't afford a lawyer. They're going to say, I can't afford a lawyer. So how will I get a will? And
that's a fair point. There are legal aid societies out there that can help. So that's one mechanism. And the other thing is, I think that there's a stigma around, how much are lawyers going to cost? And that is very state specific and jurisdiction specific, right? So if you go to your small hometown lawyer, you may get a will for $400. Where if you are in a big metropolitan area, an estate plan could be $4,000. So, I think that there's a stigma that I can't afford a lawyer. And I don't think that's always the case. I can tell you that in the 20 years I've been doing this, like my clients' net worth it's grown, right? They've just grown through life and have more money now. But I have kids that are teachers, and I do it because I got into this business to help people. I will often do things really cheap for clients because I want to help people, right? And it's not that hard to do a will and a simple estate plan.
And you'll say that, like, can I help? You'll say, like, do you need help budgeting for this? Like, you'll say that. Clark Hill obviously there's a certain price, but that things cost. But you're saying you would say, hey, I can do this for cheaper slightly, or I can figure out how to make this simple, instead of 6 tiers of a will. Or
like Clark Hill doesn't set the price, right? The price is set by me.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't know that. Okay.
There's people that get the friends and family discount.
Okay.
There's people that are difficult to work with, so they get the difficult client premium. It's more of an art than a science. But for friends and family, I feel it's important to help. Like I said, I've done, and I donate estate plans. I just donated one to a local police department in Sturgis because I think it's important to give back, right? So, the first responders oftentimes aren't able to do that. So I usually donate a few estate plans a year to various organizations just to try to give back. But, if somebody came to me and obviously there's a limit, right? Somebody said, can you do something for $50? I can't do that. But I've worked out, payment plans with clients where I'm saying, you pay $100 a month for, 12 months or whatever it is. I just want it to be done right, because if you don't do it right, the $1,200 that you spent on the front end could become $12,000 to clean up the mess.
How do you handle when siblings are arguing or struggling to, like, they have lost a parent and then they're looking at this will or this trust and it's not what they thought it was going to be? Or how do you navigate? Because I bet you're like a therapist sometimes, right? You have to manage family dynamics and grief and personal politics inside a family. How do you manage that?
You do. And it usually starts with the parents, right? Because I would say 80% of the plans are split everything equally to my kids, right? So the problems with that type of plan would be if like a kid thought he deserved more.
Right.
Or they can't agree on the personal property, right? And that's kind of like the stuff that we have in our house, that like, I want dad's sports collection, or I want mom's ring, two daughters fighting over the wedding ring, something like that. That's where you see the issues where kind of everything is split equally.
Mm-hmm.
I call it the red bike syndrome, where one child got a red bike when he was 7 and he's held that, in his head for all these years. And now that mom and dad are dead, my sibling got the red bike when he was 7 and I did.
Oh, wow.
So there's all these childhood issues that can pop up when mom and dad are dead. The other thing that you see is like, if parents are treating their children differently because of whatever reason, usually the easiest is if one is like super successful, right? So they'll get less because they're, a neurosurgeon or something like that.
Right. Like, yeah, they don't get the money because they're doing fine, or they assume that, right? Yeah.
Correct. Where you get into problems is if like one of the children has issues or perceived issues, or, it could be substance abuse or mental health issues, or just doesn't manage money well, or eliminated. I mean, some clients say, I'm not leaving anything to a kid, which is all well and good. It's their money. They can do with it what they want. But then you have to manage the message there, right? So there's different ways that you can do it. It's all, specific to the clients. I have clients that have written letters to their kids. This scares the living hell out of me because I don't know what those letters say. But the instructions are, when I'm dead, give these 4 letters to my kids.
And you can't open them. You don't know what they say, right? You're not reading them.
Nope. Yeah, I am bound by my ethical duties to open them and read them to the kids when the dad is gone. No idea what they say. I suspect that it's not going to be a very pleasant experience, I would guess.
Wow. I feel like there should be a clinician on the call with you, like a therapist. I'm being like serious. You do these just you over Zoom? You just do them alone without any support? That's hard, right? For you and for them.
Well, yeah, for everybody. I mean,
for everybody, yeah.
Over the last 2 years, everything has been really via Zoom, right? So we're now starting to get back to in person. So like,
yeah,
some of these meetings are now in person. I'm meeting somebody that just lost their husband in person, because I think you can relay emotions and comfort a little bit better in person than over Zoom.
Yes.
So in those, and again, this is more of an art than a science.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to know what is best, right? So like when that dad dies and those 4 kids have to be read their letters, we're doing that in the conference room, like not over Zoom. It's just something you learn over your 20 years of doing this, is how do we approach this problem and, manage the grief as possible. My standard response when somebody calls me up and says, mom or dad died, absent any, they're like, what do we need to do? And, most of the time I've seen their assets and I know they have money and everything else. My advice is, the first thing that you need to do is grieve, and you need to process that, and you need to give me a call, once the funeral is done, once you've had a kind of a little bit of time to regroup and get your feet under you. There's nothing that we need to do that is so urgent that you need to talk to me right now. I think that grieving process is very important. Yeah.
And they hear you. They like, yeah, usually. I mean, maybe they're going, hey, I'm over grieving. Where's the money? I wonder like how many times they push back.
Very rare. Again, I've been doing it 20 years. So like, I've known these families for a long time. I know a lot of clients' kids' names and their grandkids and everything else. So like, it's a very intimate and personal relationship, right? So, how's your son doing in swimming, or how's his new job with whatever. So, and that's the part I like about it, right? About my job is getting to know the families and helping them. So the vast majority of clients they listen. They really do.
Yeah.
And if there is the one brother that's going to be difficult, then, we're kind of ready for it and everything else. But for the vast majority of people, they do listen. And, a week or two after the funeral, we'll have a meeting and kind of pick up and get the stuff done. And sometimes there's urgency, right? So sometimes it's
right.
I've had a guy that went to the hospital on a Friday with with stomach pain. He was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, died on Tuesday. So we got him a estate plan done. We couldn't get it funded, obviously. I drafted him an estate plan on Saturday. He executed it Sunday, and he passed Tuesday. So
wow.
Again,
wow. Yeah.
I think we have our standard advice, right? That it works, but you deal with the circumstances as they come.
So why did you get into this work? You said you got into it to help people, but like, what's the real answer? No. What did you?
Do you want the real answer?
Of course I do.
Interesting story.
This is the moment, my friend.
So flashback to 1995. I was going to be a senior in high school. A man by the name of O.J. Simpson was on trial, right? So
heard of him? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that summer, I went to a basketball camp and got really sick, and literally was at the University of Iowa hospitals for like 6 weeks. They were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I went from about 200 pounds to 155. It turned out that I had mono. And that summer, there was a pork parasite called Cryptosporidium going around that was making a lot of people sick. Some people died. So at the basketball camp, not only did I get mono, I got the parasite.
Oh my God.
Lost a bunch of weight. And literally all I could do that summer was lay on my couch and watch CNN. So I watched that, almost the entire trial. And I was like, this is very interesting. I think I could be a lawyer. I like, watching them go back and forth. So it kind of planted a seed that I wanted to be a lawyer. Fast forward, I graduate, and then I started my first job in Rockford, Illinois. And I worked for a solo practitioner and started to do pretty much everything, right? It taught me really fast that I was not cut out to be a litigator. So like all of those trials I watched, I'm like, this is horrible. Like people fighting and the stress. And I'm like, this isn't what I envisioned helping people was, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My running thought was like, if I keep doing this, I'm going to burn out or worse. So I took a flyer. I put a bunch of resumes out to firms in Chicago, was hired by a wonderful small firm that, had great estate planners. And I said, I want to learn how to be an estate planner. And they taught me, and it's been the best decision I've ever made, because like every day I'm actually helping people. And I just didn't feel like that before. That is the Cliff Notes version of how I got into
from OJ to estate planning. That's amazing. Isn't that what doctors do? You say like, do you smoke? And you're like, a little. And then they're like, how many a week? Right. And you say 3 cigarettes, and they're like, great, a pack. Right. Just up it to a pack.
Exactly.
Yeah. She's clearly lying, or is saying a couple drinks. Yeah. How many? Right. I wanted to read back to you what you said to me when we were first emailing. I think it was like in 2021. You were like, I found your podcast, or like, congrats on the podcast. And you said you needed to take time with the episodes because they're heavy, and they are, even though they're also funny. But you said you joined the shitty club of losing a mom on April 22, 2006. My mom died April 16th, 2016. So our moms died almost, 4 days apart, or no, 6 days apart, 10 years apart. And you said, if you do come back with your podcast, I'd be willing to come on and talk, although I may need to have a drink afterwards, which it's fine. It's noon. And you said that you and your mom had a good relationship, but it certainly was not without its issues, as she was extremely overprotective in your youth. You said, if you do decide to bring it back, I'd do it. And I think it'd be good for me to talk about some of these things. So I just wanted to read that back to you and ask you where you want to start. How do you want to talk about your mom today?
Wow.
Yeah. Good luck. Have fun, Ryan.
Thanks. Well, I'm glad I got the tissues here.
I love it. I love it, Ryan. Yes. Yes. Get vulnerable.
You'll hear the sniffles, right? So I do remember stumbling upon your podcast and listening. I'm like, holy shit, this is just amazing. I was like so impressed that you did it, right? I think it's so important.
Yeah.
And it brought back lots of memories. And this is how I figured it would. I love my mom. So this is like all of we're going to do the guardians and everything else just coming out, right? So you put on a face for everyone and then you get vulnerable. So, all right. So we're going to get through this. Whew. I love my mom and we had a great relationship. And like, I remember going off to school and then she came in, she's like, I was at law school and she says, I'm sick and I'm going to have a hysterectomy and, we're going to go through the treatment and we'll get through it together.
How old were you?
Oh, so that would have been 2001 when she was diagnosed, 78. So I would have been 88, 98, 23. So 23-year-old going to law school, mom's diagnosed with cancer, sisters in school, dad's a truck driver, trying to get treatments. It was a mess. And luckily my dad was a union truck driver. So we had all kinds of great insurance. So we didn't have a lot of the problems that, some families have when they're not insured and like, what do we do and everything else. So we had access to really good medical care and everything else. So she had a hysterectomy, did chemo, everything was good. And then it just came back with a vengeance in about 2005. And, she was going to Mayo for treatment and nothing was working. And we just knew that the time was coming, right? So it wasn't unknown, but it didn't make it was easy. So I actually quit. My dad was having just a really rough time. So I quit my job in Rockford and moved home. And I stayed home I moved back into the room I grew up in high school with for like 3 months and just kind of took care of the bills.
What was that like? Do you remember the feeling of walking back in there?
Hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was bizarre. I mean, it felt surreal. Like I was living a dream. Like this isn't happening, but it was happening, right? Because you got to deal with it. And my dad was a wreck and, he wasn't able to deal with it. And then they were using like some drugs that the insurance company was giving him a hard time about. And I had to write letters to the insurance company. And, I remember being at a table at 3:00 in the morning, writing a letter to the insurance company, appealing to the trustees about how this medicine should be approved. And, mom is just really sick. And it was horrible. It was horrible. But I mean, at least, looking back, I could help in some ways.
Did she like you being there, your mom? I know that she was going through a lot physically and mentally, but could you tell that she loved having you, that she felt your presence, that she felt your support? Yeah.
Yeah, I think deep down she did. I mean, She loved her kids like most moms do. She was super, super overprotective. So like as a kid, like I'd go, can I go ride a bike? And she'd be like, well, there might be a white van that could kidnap you. So you can only go around the one block. Right. So she was super, super overprotective.
Mm.
But I think it was out of a place of love. It just, I think as parents, sometimes we overcorrect. So, what I try to do with my kids is, because I think a lot of it's hardwired, right? There's just certain things that we're hardwired to do. So I think my mom was a hardwired warrior. So in her mind, the worst thing that could go wrong was going to happen, right? And I have some of that too, right? So but what I think I try to do is recognize that and say, I'm not going to do that with my kids, right? So when my kids ask to do stuff, even if I'm uncomfortable, I don't try to plant those seeds like, you could get kidnapped. Anybody could get kidnapped. I could get hit by a bus, but I don't.
Yeah.
I think with our kids, we worry because they're our kids. So I try to get a better fine line than my mom had with us. But it was out of a place of love. I just think that in some ways, it impacted us because all of a sudden you start to always picture the worst. And I just don't think that's a good way to go through life. I try to say, let's always focus on the positive, right? And if the worst comes, shit happens and you deal with it. So I've tried to take that love and kind of reframe it. But, it is hard to think about.
Yeah. Did your mom have a will? Did your parents have a will?
Yeah, yeah, they did. They had a simple will. And it basically said, upon my death, everything goes to my husband and, goes to our kids. So it was actually the will they did when it was right after my sisters were born in 84. I think it was like, they did it right after my sisters were born. And it, like I said, it was a very, very simple will. My mom was always a stay-at-home mom. So she basically raised us. My dad was the breadwinner, was the truck driver, was gone all week.
Yeah.
So, she didn't have very many assets. So there wasn't really a lot to do.
I wonder if that's why she was so protective, because like he wasn't,
Could be.
it's just her, right? Like for that week, or that feeling of, I'm the parent, I can't rely, I got to rely on me. I'm in charge. I'm the only person making sure right now until he comes back, on the weekends. Like, I wonder, the pressure she felt to keep you safe
and keep you safe and get you to the sporting events. And it's a lot. Like, it takes a village, right? I mean, my wife and I have 2 kids, and we struggle to keep up with their activities and everything else. So, as an adult, and looking back, I mean, I get it. I mean, it's super hard. And, in some ways she was raising us alone because my dad was gone, and, my dad did his best to, have his schedule. So he was back for sporting events and such. But I mean, you gotta pay the bills. So, I do think I think you're right.
Did your mom, was there something that you two did together where you felt like she loosened up, like she let, you guys, something you two did, just you two, and she wasn't so worried, like at the, swim park, or I don't know, going to the mall together? Was there something you two did together and you didn't feel her anxiety as high?
So we didn't, nothing like that. She actually opened up to my now wife, because we had just started dating, and, my wife got thrown into this, and my wife's a planner. So, my wife had probably known me. Well, my wife and I grew up in the same town, so she knew who I was, but we had only been dating, I guess, for 6 months. But so she put together a fundraiser, raised just a ton of money up at the town and everything else. So my wife was like all in as well with all of this stuff. But she told my wife, I'm no longer worried about Ryan because he's with you. So
I'm gonna cry.
So that was hard. So she worried all the way until the end, but she at least felt like somebody else was going to take, be there.
And your wife's like, no pressure.
Yeah. So it was heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, it was heavy, and she was really sick, but we got through it as best we could.
I know it's emotional for you. Obviously, I can see it, but so I wonder, like, do you pick and choose when or if you share this with clients? Do you ever talk about your own personal story to connect with them? Even though you don't want to cry, and I understand you're a professional, but like, just curious about it. Yeah.
This is actually an easy one to answer because I normally don't. I have enough stories from other people's circumstances where I don't have to go into the vault, right? So that's why I said, when I was talking to you, I'm not sure what happens when I take the lid off.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I haven't started drinking, so that's good. I've remained somewhat composed. So I think I'm not doing as bad as I thought I was going to do, like, which was like a puddle on the floor.
Yeah.
But I have enough I have stories about other people where I don't necessarily have to take that lid off and discuss. So,
yeah,
you're actually the first person in almost 20 years that I've actually talked in any depth about.
I'm the first person.
This. Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I've never talked about like, well, because it's not like something that comes up in conversation, right? Like all of our family was there when she passed, and my wife was there in the shit when she passed. So like, it's not a story you talk about at a bar.
Right.
So when you're in this club, this shitty club that we're all in, I think it's, you know, it's a place where it's okay to discuss it and, you know, learn from it and what was good, what was bad, what did mom do that was good, what did mom do that was bad? How do we be better? How do we learn? How do we grow? So that's why I'm like, I'm going to try.
And Ryan, maybe the more you do talk about it, either with your wife or me or a specific client who's lost a mom, and maybe their story connects with you in a way that you feel you need to share, like the more you share, potentially maybe the less scary it'll become for you, or violent, like that feeling of like, I'm going to become a blubbering mess. You'll cry less and it won't feel so scary. But I also believe if I knew when I met you in 2016 that you had lost your mom, if you had told me that then, I have to be honest, I already liked you and trusted you, but I might have been like, oh, I'm in. I like Ryan. Ryan knows what this is like. But I'm weird. I'm somebody, I don't need you to cry in my session with me. But if you did, of course, you know, I'd be like, yes, like, let's hug each other. Let's be vulnerable. But I guess I mean, it makes you seem less like just some lawyer and you're a human to me. And then I understand why you got into this business or whatever, or I learn more about your story. I'm just so curious about when people choose in the professional setting to be vulnerable, you know, and how that helps people feel like they can connect. You know, I know it can be risky. I know that I'm not acting like it's not. But if more people in society did this, talked like this, it wouldn't be so scary. Do you know what I mean?
So and I have told clients in general, you know, especially when they lose their mom, I'm like, I'm so sorry. I know how it feels. I lost my mom in 2006, and that's usually it.
And that's it. You leave it there. Yeah. Right.
I leave it there. And if and most people are like, thank you very much. Because I don't want to make it about me, but I do want to feel like I know what you're going through. And you know, no one has really asked past that. I just thought it was important for me personally to have this conversation with you, just to see what happens when you take off the lid, right? Because I do this for a living, and you know, I think I'm pretty good at it, know what to say to people, and you know, not only a good lawyer, but a good listener and a good person. You're a great
listener. Yeah.
So I was like, let's see what happens. Let's talk about it and do it. And you're probably right. I probably should have done it 10 years ago, but.
Oh, no, it's not woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I didn't have a podcast back then. So that's me saying back then who knows what I would have wanted back then.
True. But it's like the people that have the will sitting on their desk, right? And they mean to get to it, and they mean to get to it, and they mean to get to it. And then finally you just do it, right? And as long as you haven't died, you're no harm, no foul. So I was petrified to do this. I can tell you I'm happy that I did.
Yay.
It's been a learning experience. And I'm, like I said, I'm very happy that I did it. And it's, I think it's part of growing as a person and sorting through these feelings that, you know, losing your mom, even one of the things I would carefully say to clients is losing your mom absolutely sucks. And it's going to suck for a long time. And it gets less sucky. But it's you only have one mom, and it's tough to lose them, right? Because, you know, oftentimes they raised you, and it can be complicated, and you know, the dynamic isn't always perfect, and it is what it is. And I think there's probably a lot of people that have issues with their parents that they kind of gloss over, right? Because they want a perfect image of mom and dad or whatever. But I think everybody has issues with their mom and dad, and no one's perfect. And I think that communicating is good, right? Because over the past 20 years, our communication has went from communication like this, where we're actually talking to people, to everything being emails and social media. And I think that so many more problems in life and society and like it could just be solved or lessened if we just talked, right? Like,
yes, politics.
We're just a social creature, and to be not talking is just a disservice, right? So, you know, talking to you has been therapeutic, actually. So I will probably go have lunch and not a drink.
Okay, good. That's good. Yeah, I might have more coffee. Do you ever talk to your mom still? Like, do you ever talk to her in the dark of night? Do you ever say anything? Do you ever ask for advice? Do you ever, I don't mean in a religious way. I guess I mean in a spiritual way, right? Or a witchy
I
way.
sometimes think, what would she think about if I had a choice, like, what would she think?
Yeah.
But I don't really I guess that's somewhat asking for advice. Her opinion, if she was around, would still be important to me. So I do think in those terms, like, what would mom think if I did A or B or C or something like that? So I guess in a way.
Yeah, you want her approval. You want her to say, good job, or you're smart, or
Are you an idiot?
or you're an idiot.
Are you an idiot? Because there's been plenty of times as a teenager and a young adult where she rightfully called me an idiot, right? Because there's, like any young kid, I don't have a perfect past and have done some pretty dumb things looking back on it.
But she would never have cut you out of her will.
No, she wouldn't.
Okay, no, you're not that bad. You're not that bad.
Yeah, not that bad. But like, everything was out of a position of love. And, I've seen enough families over the 20 years of doing this that's not always the case. I mean, there's some parents that are bad parents, and I'm like, thank God these aren't my parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being a professional, I can't let my personal preference, get into it. So I do feel lucky that, that my mom cared.
Do you have any last minute advice for people who are doing estate planning or thinking about it, or don't know how to talk to their kids or their family? Like, what final advice around estate planning?
Yeah. I mean, most people say one day. Yeah, one day I'll get it done. I'd make that day today and just bite the bullet and get it done. And then then you can change it, right? So, there's just no, you just never know when you're going to go. I mean, I told you the story about our cleaning lady who we were texting and we couldn't get a hold of her. And 4 days later, we found out they got hit head on by a driver. So, I mean, you just never know. It's such an important thing to have in place for the peace of mind, for your loved ones, for your kids, for your friends, to just do it, right? There's no reason to wait.
So we could tell our friends. We could even start telling. I do now because I'm like, but it feels weird to say that to friends. But sometimes I go, hey, do you have a will yet? I mean, I don't start my cocktail hour that way, but sometimes I am like, hey, I'm just saying, do it. I'll bring it up sometimes with close friends. But like, go do it now. This is the time, Ryan, and I think because you've listened, when I ask you to tell me your mom's name, which I do not know, which is so exciting when I don't know the answer, to tell me your mom's name and how you feel about her in this moment today. What is coming up for you about your mom after this conversation?
So my mom's full legal name was Rebecca Ann Holmes. She went by Becky. And, I actually feel pretty positive. I'm glad I talked about this. I think she would be proud. And I feel pretty good. A little bit more emotional than I thought I would be. I knew I was going to be emotional. I guess I could have been worse. But in all honesty, I feel pretty good about coming on today and, sharing a little bit with you and talking about really the importance of estate planning and, just how I would implore anybody that's listening to give that some thought. And if you haven't done it, you really should do it, because it can save your loved ones a lot of angst and anxiety and issues if something happens to you.
Before my mom died, I didn't really know anything about trusts or wills or estate planning or probate court. I knew so little that when I was asked, well, what do you want to name your trust now that you've inherited this thing? I had them call it the Grieving Daughter Trust. Yep, that's what I asked for. That was printed on official documents, on checks. It was so bizarre, but that's all I could think of at the time. They said you could name it anything. And that's what I chose. I lived as the grieving daughter on paper for way longer than I should have, eventually changing it to my name just last year. I guess I was done grieving as far as the bank was concerned. So I'm somebody who likes logistics and making lists and checking things off. And so when my mom died, my entire identity and focus became this to-do list. Find a realtor, check. Sell the townhome, check. Get her art appraised, check. Donate her clothing, check. Cancel her utility bills, check, check. Move some of her furniture to your home in Chicago, check. Pick up her ashes at the funeral home, check. Put off really sitting with and acknowledging that your only mother just died, check, check. I didn't know what to do with her car, but thankfully her loyal caretaker politely asked me and carefully told me that my mother had pretty much promised her the car. The caretaker said she had been the only person driving the car for over a year now, as my mom had lost the ability to drive or walk. She could barely even stand on her own at this point. I mean, I didn't personally want a 2007 SUV that smelled like my mother and reminded me of difficult Christmas visits past, or driving to the pharmacy for her medication and running into Jewel for appetizers and wine. So I gave the caregiver the car for $1. I signed over the title and everything. Yep, check. After my mom died, I remember a playwright friend of mine asked me, "How can I help?" And I told him, well, maybe you could write her obituary. Check, check. I asked a bunch of girlfriends to come to my mom's townhome and purge, organize, donate, trash, clean, and honor her space and her things. One of my oldest friends found some sad handwritten notes about my mother's physical pain and sadness, scribbled in shaky pen in her drawer, probably written around 2 a.m. one morning when she couldn't sleep. That friend made a point to only show me one note and threw away the rest. Other friends also made a point of making sure I didn't have to step into her closet until I was ready, and gave me the support I needed as I took deep breaths, working my way through her robes, her slippers, her Chico's blazers and belts. Looking and smelling her jewelry tray felt like being slapped, like it physically hurt, and I couldn't look or touch her pieces for weeks. And now it's some of the most comforting things that I own. Jewelry is also so beautiful to look at, and beauty is healing. I donated her medical equipment as fast as I could, making sure I got to say goodbye to her walker one last time, as if the walker knew who I was. The daughter who didn't visit enough. The daughter who made her mother weep some days. The daughter who wanted a mother who could walk, who wasn't in pain all the time. A mother who could leave the home, who could be joyful and happy and healthy. My mother's caretaker told me that paperwork from the law firm asking her for her signature and her new beneficiaries on her account had been floating around the kitchen counter for months, on top of bank statements, under cards mixed in with bills and magazines. The paperwork just sat, unsigned. The papers needed someone to make a decision, to fill in a name and acknowledge the inevitable, that death was around the corner. And since my mom was pretty much bedridden in the last year of her life, it makes sense that the paperwork never made it to her, all the way in the bedroom. Maybe the reality of her situation and the gravity of this legal decision was just too much to bear. She was already dying, which was probably terrifying enough. And maybe my mom didn't want to put pen to paper and sign her life and her future away to me, the grieving daughter, the only heir, the one left. Practice gratitude every day and wear some of her jewelry while you record this closer today. Check, check. Before I leave you, I just wanted to let you know that Ryan has graciously offered to give away 2 discounted estate plans. So if you live in the states of Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, or Michigan, and you need a will made up for yourself or for your family, you need to draft a complicated estate plan, you've got a trust, you have other legal questions, email me directly, dana@danablack.org, and I will put you in touch with Ryan. He is giving away 2 discounted estate plans. So hurry, act now, act fast, get your wills in place. Quick, quick, quick. And thanks again, Ryan, for all of your guidance and for offering this, because I know there's somebody out there who could really use this. And so we are very grateful. Thanks. Talk to you soon. the third season, which is crazy to say, of I Swear on My Mother's Grave podcast would never be possible without our editor, Amanda Mayo from Cassiopeia Studio. I also want to thank our music composer, Adam Ohlendorf, our graphic designer and illustrator, Meredith Montgomery, our copywriter, Rachel Claff, and Tony Howell and Jonathan Freeland for all of their work on our beautiful website. And as always, thank you to Heather Bodie for her emotional, spiritual, social, physical, for all of the help over all of the years. Thank you. And all of you, thank you for listening, for subscribing, for reaching out, for telling all of your friends. I know that this club, this complicated, messy club, isn't fun to be in, but I'm so glad that you're here. I couldn't do this without you. So thank you for being a part of this community. And if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do so at our website, which is danablack.org, not just because I want to sell you stuff, but because I want to keep talking to you and you talking to me. So go check that out. There's personal stories. I'll tell you about the season, and you'll learn about some live retreats that we're curating, one retreat at a time. So yeah, thanks for being here. I hope you'll come back. Will you come back? Don't leave me like my dead mom. You know what I mean? Come back, please. I'll talk to you soon.